Hello. Today's topic is Split Arrow, Puncture Gladiator, which deals damage via bleeding out opponents. One of the most efficient ways to deal physical damage over time, or its more known variant, bleed, is to pick a bow-wielding gladiator. Blood in the eyes and gratuitous violence are the two keystones granting an unmatched advantage over any other class when it comes to bleed damage. Using split arrows to dispatch the numerous frail enemies is extremely efficient when each of the multiple arrows chains. The damage over time is so high that most of these low-life opponents will die in a blink of an eye, and due to gratuitous violence, exploding on death, and causing profuse carnage. Usually, this type of build struggles with single target damage, but it can be surmounted by using the Exile unique helmet. It forces its socketed bow skill gem, Puncture in this case, to be channeled. At maximum stages, it increases the bleeding DOT by 720% and hit damage by 990%. This kills most of the bosses. This build doesn't use Crimson Dance, as by maximizing the speed at which your bleeding damage is dealt, it's nearly impossible to get to the 8 stacks of bleeding. It also doesn't use Corrupting Fever. It won't do much against bosses because of the snipe skill that requires a few seconds of channeling. The damage skills are Split Arrow and Snipe, which enables a powerful Puncture. Puncture inflicts a bleed of a base duration of 8 seconds, which is much higher than the regular 5. It also has very high base damage, added effectiveness, and more bleeding damage. An obvious choice for an attack. The durability comes mostly from an above-average life pool, around 40k armor, and the Outmatch and Outlast keystone that reduces physical damage you take. It also benefits from Enduring Cry combined with Call to Arms to regenerate life. It's weak against elemental and DOT types of damage. Clear speed is what this build excels at, it's very good. Single target damage is great. Given you can shoot an enemy with a single projectile, it can reach over 10 mil DPS. The basic version is very cheap, but upgrading it requires a significant investment. This build has one specific unique item required, the Exile. However, it's important to stack as much physical damage over time multiplier as possible, which kind of enforces you to follow up a predetermined route when equipping your character. To generate frenzy charges we've used Ferul's Fur, but it can be achieved by other means. Exile makes your linked bow skill a channeling attack that can gain up to 6 stages. Each stage increases damage with hits by 165% and damage with ailments by 120%. It's a perfect fit for the Puncture setup to use during boss fights. The Crimson Storm is a budget option that should be much cheaper than a crafted or elder rare alternative for a bow. It offers no DOT bonuses, except for high added physical damage against bleeding enemies. Maloney's mechanism provides an alternative place to socket your ensnaring arrow or frenzy that will be fired consistently, requiring some decent mana regeneration. Our top recommendation for the body armor slot is Lionized Vision. It grants high maximum life, high armor, and the extra pierce support for your split arrow setup. Ferul's Fur is great if you have a source of Aspect of the Cat. It's a suffix that can be beast-crafted. It's the best source of frenzy charges during long boss fights, but it's also pretty good on its own. Rislatha's Coil is a great belt that boosts your base physical damage dealt with attacks, one that you should definitely get at some point. A very large ring variant of Thread of Hope placed between Vigor and Savagery allows you to allocate Disciple of the Slaughter, Unyielding, and Heavy Draw. Watcher's Eye Jewel increases your DPS significantly. You can either get one that makes ailments deal damage faster or one with DOT multiplier. Both come from Malevolence, but you're also using Determination. The rare gear is centered around capping elemental resistances and gathering maximum life. It's very basic. For better defenses seek Spell Suppression, Chaos Resistance, and Armor. There are also some instances where you can gain extra gem levels for Puncture, or the ability for Bleed to deal damage faster. But the more accessible offensive mods are the simple ones for increased damage over time multiplier and added damage. The best in-slot option in the weapon slot is a rare bow. You are looking for an Elder Influence type with bleeding modifiers, but you can craft an additional physical damage over time multiplier mod too. Another best option is a rare quiver. as it can grant an additional physical damage over time multiplier on top of some extra damage and defensive bonuses. Get a pair of boots with the highest maximum defensive stats and high movement speed. For enhanced bleeding rate, seek a specific hunter suffix. Gloves. Primarily focus on defensive stats here. Apothecary's gloves offers an advantage, increased damage over time as it's implicit. Stygian Vice with appropriate stats such as life and resistances will be sufficient. There are not a lot of useful mods on a belt. On your amulet, try to get some extra DPS with maximum life and any missing attributes. Global gem level modifiers are not really necessary. Rings should cap your resistances and possibly grant some additional DPS. Added physical damage and attributes can be abundant due to Kalandra's mirrors. You should also get one ring with vulnerability curse on hit. Rare jewels should provide extra life, attributes, and damage bonuses, nothing out of the ordinary. With some tinkering, you can fit one of the large cluster jewels in your build to increase your damage, but it's completely optional. The flasks are 4 magical utility flasks and 1 life flask. Sulfur flask for increased damage, silver flask for the onslaught buff, basalt flask for armor, and quicksilver flask for movement speed would be the best options. These should remove bleeding or freeze on use and grant some additional armor. The split arrow setup can be socketed on a bow or body armor depending on which one grants you local modifiers, if any. Link it with vicious projectiles, life tap, maim, swift affliction, and chance to bleed support gems. If your chance to bleed is already high, which it should be, replace the last one with chain support. If you have an awakened brutality support gem, you can use it too for more damage. Puncture shall be socketed in an Asylum helmet. It's used solely for taking down bosses, so you will be fine with it firing just one projectile. Link it with vicious projectiles, brutality, and deadly ailments support gems. These all have awakened versions. For mana reserving skills, we propose determination and malevolence for armor and more damage over time. These are pretty much mandatory. Blood and Sand is not very useful, but it activates the Arena Challenger keystone and reserves little to no mana. Herald of Purity grants you more physical damage, and so does the War Banner. You probably won't be able to fit all of them, and if that's the case, don't use the War Banner. Link these 4 or 5 skills with the Enlightened Support Gem for an increased mana reservation efficiency. Ensnaring Arrow is a very useful bow attack that slows down enemies and increases projectile damage they take. This skill has to be cast once in a while and it will be then triggered automatically by your Mirage Archer, Maloney's Mechanism, or a Ballista Totem. Dash is the recommended mobility skill. It provides you with a way to avoid attacks and spells, and to progress through areas faster. Link it with the second Wind Support Gem. Molten Shell grants increased armor and a protective shield able to take a lot of damage, depending on how much armor you have. Link it with Cast when damage taken support, it can be leveled all the way up. Enduring Cry generates endurance charges and grants high life regeneration, which works in a similar way to a life flask. Vulnerability increases physical damage and damage over time you deal, making it the best curse for this build. We recommend killing all bandits for the additional 2 passive points. Soul of Solaris is a good option to gain some extra durability during boss fights, but if you struggle with damage over time, especially Chaos DOT, pick Aracali. There are a lot of minor gods to choose from. Soul of Gruthkal is the best option to mitigate physical hit damage. Abarath is good against Ignite, Ralakesh, Bleeding, and Shikari, poison damage. The passive skill tree is very simple, just pick maximum life and bleed damage. It can be found at the bottom of the passive skill tree and near the Marauder's starting location. In addition to that, get some armor, additional maximum endurance charges, and mana reservation efficiency. On the right side, there are 3 bow clusters that are also associated with damage over time. These are very good. For masteries, pick Mirage Archer Duration if you're using it on your Ensnaring Arrow as a bow mastery. The 2 maximum life nodes for more maximum life. 1 bleed mastery for the bleeding duration, and the second one for damage over time per endurance charge. As the armor mastery, allocate the one for an increased reservation efficiency for determination. Physical mastery has a war banner mana reservation efficiency, which might be helpful too. Iron reflexes, unwavering stance, resolute technique, and call to arms are the keystones to pick up. That is all for the Split Arrow Puncture Gladiator, a simple and affordable build. Consider leaving a like if the guide was helpful. See you in the next video.